Welcome back to the channel. This is what we will be talking about in this video. So after this introduction portion, you'll be watching a video that was recorded as part of an online course that I made. So if you like it, do check out my course. I'll have the link in the description, and you can see the link too at the bottom of this video together with my YouTube and Instagram socials. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so let us now go through this way of solving the equation, right, using this thing called the complete the square method. So just a quick recap, right, we have went through how to solve using factorization, how to solve quadratic equation using the formula. So now we are at our third way to solve quadratic equation, which is this thing called the complete the square or completing the square. Alright, so let's go through. This front part is almost the same thing as what we've always been doing, so not gonna dwell too much on it. Basically, just do a cross multiplication, expand this, you will get this, simplify, and you will end up with the quadratic equation. So let's pick up from the quadratic equation and let's work with it. So for this quadratic equation, right, we're gonna use the completing the square method to actually solve. Right, so what is this completing the square method, right? So to do the completing the square method, I have to first express this quadratic equation in this special form, right? In a form where it is actually the complete the square form. So what is this complete the square form? So this complete the square form is actually obtained when you take this front part, right? And if you have like a x square, just drop the square, so you end up with a x. And take this x term, right? And remove away the x. So whatever that is left after removing the x, right? Just divide the number by 2, right? So regardless of whether it's a fraction, it's a decimal, right? So just take the number, divide by 2, and in this case, negative 3 is what we have. So divide that by 2, that is negative 1.5, right? And then put a bracket and then square this whole thing. So this is what I like to call the bracket square form. Okay, so the very first step of completing the square is actually first coming up with your bracket square form. Okay, because once you have your bracket square form, right, actually this you're already halfway through changing this quadratic equation to the complete the square form. So now let's continue with the rest of the part. So the rest of the part of the completing the square form looks like this. And what this is basically introducing some numbers to finish up with this complete the square form. And how you will finish up with this and how you will put in these numbers is by first subtracting, right, the number over here. So basically, this will actually introduce 1.5. So over here you have a 1.5, right? So I'm gonna subtract away this 1.5 square, right? And the reason for that, I shall go through in a bit. But first, let's subtract this 1.5, right? And the 1.5 came from this number here, square. And then I'm gonna subtract a 18. This 18 came from here, right? This negative 18 came from here. And let me just show you real quick why I have to do this, okay? So the reason is because you have already expressed this quadratic equation in the complete the square form, right? And if you were to expand this complete the square form, right? Let's just expand it real quick over here. So this is x minus 1.5 multiplied by x minus 1.5. And by doing the butterfly method, right, to expand this, you will get x squared minus 1.5x minus 1.5x, and then plus this 1.5 times 1.5, right? So what you will get is essentially plus 2 and 1 over 4, right? Because this is actually negative 1.5 multiplied by negative 1.5. And putting the calculator, you will know that you will get this 2 and 1 quarter, right? And that would mean that you have a x squared minus 3x plus 2 and 1 quarter. So what does this mean, right? This means that essentially this bracket square form is this, right? Just expressed in the bracket x minus 1.5 whole thing square. So if the bracket square form is actually this, I have actually changed my quadratic equation to this x squared minus 3x plus 2 and 1 quarter. And we know that, of course, this x squared minus 3x minus 18 is not equal to this, right? It cannot be just converted to this, right? So that's why I'm actually accounting for this change by introducing some numbers. So what numbers am I introducing? Right, essentially this minus 1.5 square, right? I'm actually trying to subtract away this 2 and 1 quarter. Why? Because if I subtract away this 2 and 1 quarter, right, then I can add a negative 18, right, or I can put in a negative 18, then this is essentially the same equation as this. That means that I have not done anything to change my equation, right? The whole purpose of me putting this number here is so that I can have the original equation, right? Because this must be equal to this thing here, right? I cannot go from one line of the equation and having it look or having it being a totally different equation, right? So because of that, I actually am accounting for this change that I made. And what is the change? The change that I made is this equation, right? Moving it and changing it to this bracket square form. So I can make this into the bracket square form, and that is part of my completing a square. But know that when you change it to your bracket square form, unknowingly, right, you will have changed the equation. And over here I showed you that I've actually changed the equation from this one over here, right, to this one over here. So how do I let it be consistent? I take away essentially this 2 and 1 quarter. And how do I take away this 2 and 1 quarter? You actually subtract away, right, this number square, right? And by subtracting that, I am actually subtracting away my this negative 1.5 times negative 1.5, this 2 and 1 quarter. And after subtracting it, right, this is what I'll be left with, right? Of course, this is still not the original equation. So I'm going to put a negative 18, right, or add a negative 18, so that now this equation is consistent with the original equation that I begin with even before making this or even before starting to complete the square, before I have this bracket square form. Okay, so that is why a lot of students think that, oh, this bracket square form is very magical, right? How can you just move from this quadratic equation to this bracket square form, right? I didn't, right? I make it into the bracket square form, but I know that because I am just turning it into a bracket square form, I need to account for the fact that the equation, this equation here and this equation here, must be the same, right? And these numbers, although it looks very magical, right, these numbers are the numbers that will help me account for it, so that this whole original equation, right, let me show you, so that this whole equation here that you have completed a square will be the same as the original equation that you start off with. So with that, I can further simplify, right? Further simplify the numbers, which is these things over here, right? So just put in your calculator, right? Negative 1.5 bracket, right? Then square minus 18, you will get this. So with that, this is my completed square equation. This is the equation that I get after completing the square, right? And this equation, you can go and expand and simplify, will be the same as my starting equation. Okay, so that is the process that I went through to complete the square. So this technique over here is the technique that you have to use to complete the square, right? And what is that technique? That technique involves two things, right? The first is to get your bracket square form. Okay, and how do I get my bracket square? Earlier I've mentioned already, and I shall repeat again, right? Take your x square, right? Drop the x, drop the square. So now you have a x. Take your number, take your x term, right? In this case, negative 3x. Remove away the x, and whatever that is left over, divide that by 2, right? So over here, that is negative 3 divided by 2 is negative 1.5. So doing that will get you your bracket square term already. Step 2 of completing the square is to subtract away, right? To subtract away this number. Okay, let me erase a bit first. This number square, right? And that's what I'm doing here, right? I'm subtracting this 1.5, which is this number square. So that is actually step 2, right? Minus the bracket square. Minus this, you can call this the number, right? So minus the number square. And then you have your third step, right? Which is go and add back the original number that is in your quadratic equation. So go and add your original number. So in our case, the original number is negative 18, so I'm going to add a negative 18. Okay, so with these 3 steps, okay, that I've highlighted to you, you should be able to change your quadratic equation to your completed square form. So with these 3 steps, you will be able to complete the square for a quadratic equation. Okay, and if you successfully did so, this is what you will end up having. You will have something that is in the form of a bracket square, and then you have numbers, right? It can be plus, can be minus, but you have some numbers here. All right, and if you go and expand this, which is what we have here, you should get back the original quadratic equation. All right, so with that, you have actually done completing the square. And sometimes a question just wants you to do completing the square. So what I mean by that? So you can have an equation, right? So y equals to x squared minus 3x minus 18. And question just wants you, hey, can you put it in the y equals to bracket square minus some number form? Or could you just complete the square for this equation? And what you will do, you will perform these 3 steps that I highlighted to you to complete the square and end up having x minus 1.5 square minus 20 1/4. And with that, you have completed the square. That's all. Alright. What we are doing now is that after completing the square, we want to solve. So the rest of the steps that I'm going to go through now is actually solving using completed the square. Alright. So we have already done completing the square. And if a question just wants you to complete the square, this is it. That's it. Okay. Now let's talk about how do you solve after you have completed the square. Okay, so the solving, right, is okay, let me remove this as well so it's not so cluttered. Okay, so now we're gonna do the solving. So now that I have this, right, to solve, I will move my negative 20 1/4 to the other side. Okay, don't go and expand this and then go and simplify, and then what will happen is you end up with the quadratic equation. And if we're going to use the quadratic equation to solve in the first place, right, we wouldn't have done completing the square. So that's not what we'll do. Instead, what we'll do is we'll move this negative 20 1/4 to the other side of the equation, right? And that's how you end up with this, right? So you can see that I have moved this to the right side, and that's why the negative 20 1/4 became positive 20 1/4. Okay, now on my left side I still have this, right? So keeping that on my left side, what will happen is that to further solve this, I will square root both sides. Why? Because over here I have a square, right? To get rid of the square, I have to square root. So I can't just square root on the left side without doing so for the right side. So I'm going to square root both sides. Okay, so after square rooting both sides, right, this is what I will end up with. And earlier I've already mentioned in the previous video why you have a plus minus where you encounter square root. So I shall not repeat it over here. Now, that is why over here I'll have the positive root 21 quarter, and then I move this over, right, negative 1.5, I move it to the other side because I'm solving for x already, so my x must be the subject of equation. So this negative 1.5 will now be positive 1.5. Okay, so that is how I arrive at this first sort of solution for x. The next one is actually the negative root 20 and 1 quarter, because over here you have the positive root as one of the answers, right? And you have the negative root as the other answer, because that's what plus minus means, right? You have the positive and the negative. And what will I do to the negative? It's actually the same as what I did to the positive, right? I will go and plus a 1.5. Why? Because this one move over, it's actually plus 1.5. Regardless of whether you have a positive root or negative root, it's all going to be plus 1.5, right? Because this plus 1.5 actually is obtained when you take this negative 1.5 and you move it to the right side of the equation. So with that, actually, I will end up having x being equals to this, or x being equals to this, and just put this into my calculator. I'll get x to be 6, and put this into my calculator, I'll be able to get x equals to negative 3, right? And this is consistent with the answers that I get when I solve using other methods, right? So when I use the formula, I get x equals to 3, x equals to negative 3, right? Because I'm solving the exact same quadratic equation. So when I did factorization, right, I get x equals to 6, x equals to negative 3. So therefore, right, to show you that it's consistent, right, when I solve using completing the square, my x value is 6 and my x value is negative 3 as well. So far, these are the 3 ways that you have learned to solve your quadratic equation. Thank you for watching till the end of the video, and I hope that you have learned something. If you did, don't forget to give this video a like and comment on one thing that you like about the video, right? Also, please help to share this video and subscribe to the channel because that will really help me a lot, and your support means the world to me. So if you don't like the video, no worries. Comment and let me know what you didn't like about it so that I can improve and I can change in the next few videos. Alright, so that's it. Thanks all, and I'll see you in the next video.